welcome you to Your Morning Latte, where we try to lift your spirit and while you fill your cup. And I've got my tea here today, a little green tea there. So maybe you can have your tea ready, or this show is coming on, and get a little libation there, some tea or coffee, and listen in. What I want to talk about today is fishing, and there's a fisherman in particular that I want to talk about, and it was Apostle John. And I had a question asked not too long ago, and they, their comments is how can we even believe that the Bible is real, it's true? They had a hard time believing that it was nothing more than a bunch of fairy tales. It's just a book written by a bunch of men. And I wanted to start out by talking about fishing. And the reason being is John was a fisherman. He fished on the Sea of Galilee, and that was his go-to place. That was the place where the business was, and they could do their fishing and so forth. And I wanted to share something with you. When I was growing up, we would fish at a little lake outside of where I grew up in Tennessee. I believe this lake maybe a mile or two either way, wide and long. And if you can see off to the little bit up above that pier, you got a set of rocks over there. And that's where I would go to most of the time, because it seemed to be the fish were around those where those rocks were, and you could catch a lot of bass in there and some brim and so forth, and even a catfish now and then, even more than what you would fish off of this pier right here. I remember when I was a kid, they had a fishing contest, and I got the biggest fish. So anyhow, I'd go out there. Most of the time I'd be out there with my grandparents, and we had another section of the lake that you can see here, and over to the right side of that picture there was a road that went down, and we'd go back over there and fish off of that bank. And most of the time all I had was a cane pole with a string and a hook on the end, and we'd get us a box of worms, and that's what we used to fish with bait. I remember sometimes my father would go out, I'd go with him out in the boat, and of course I was really, really young at that time. Catfish, and we'd do some jug fishing, and you string a line out there, and you make sure the jugs wouldn't float off, but they were milk jugs, empty milk jugs, and you tie a rope, or not a rope, but a string to that, and drop your line down, and if you go out there and that thing was bobbing up and down in the water, you had a catfish on the other end of it. So, did a lot of fishing out there when I was a kid, and had a lot of fun and so forth. And the guy I want to talk to you about is John. Now, he was a fisherman, and back in those times, kind of like it was commercial fishing now, you had fees and permits, and you either had your own boat or you leased a boat and so forth, and there wasn't really a whole lot of difference between what it is today and back then. It's just that the taxes, of course, there's a lot of taxes now, but I was reading that sometimes the fishermen would pay in their catch, and it could be anywhere from 25 to 40% of what they would catch in order to basically pay these fees, and what you had was a right to fish. They exploited most of the people, and that was one of the big complaints when Jesus was around, and the oppression that the Jews were going through with the Roman rulers is the oppression and the overburdensome of taxes and so forth. So, if you read the story, it's the great thing about the Bible is it's evidentiary in itself, and it tells a story. And this one starts in Luke, and it says, "Now it happened that a while a crowd was pressing around him," being Jesus, "and listening to the word of God. He was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, which also is the Sea of Galilee. It's also sometimes called the Sea of Tiberias. And he was standing around the lake, and he saw two boats lying at the edge of the lake, but the fishermen had gotten out of them and were washing their nets. And he got into one of the boats, which was Simon's, and asked him to put the boat out for a little while from the land. And he sat down and began teaching the people from the boat." Now he's, sitting in Simon's boat, and the boat is out just a little ways from the shore, and he had a gathering sitting on the bank of the Galilee, Sea of Galilee. And it goes on, and he says, he sat down, and he says, when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." And Simon, he says, "Master, we have worked hard all night and caught nothing, but I will do as you say and let down the nets." When they had done this, they enclosed a great quantity of fish, and their nets began to break. So they signaled to their partners, John and James, in the other boat for them to come over and help. And they came and filled the boats so that they began to sink. They had caught so much fish that the boats were about to sink. And I will see if I can pull up this next slide here. And I will show you this, where kind of give you an idea of where the Sea of Galilee is. On the left side of your screen there, you can see a photo that I pulled up from the Sea of Galilee, and there's a map on the right side there. And if you go to the east there, you'll run into Haifa and then the Mediterranean Sea. So this is from north to south, and it takes up, I think they said that it was about 650 feet below sea level, or 690 feet, but it's only 13 miles long and 7 miles wide, and the amount of fish that comes out of that lake is almost astounding. And it's, this has been going on for thousands of years. So this boat is what they would call some people know it as the Jesus boat or the Sea of Galilee boat, but it gives you an idea of what they were fishing in and the size and so forth of what they would have on the sea. And also, we can go back to this picture here, and the mountainous area, the wind has a capability of coming down and stirring up that water, and it becomes quite a storm. And you can read the Bible, and you can tell when Jesus came out and the disciples were in the midst of the storm, and we can get in that story in a different segment and so forth. But the mountainous area, that wind that comes down off of that thing can really tear up that water and create quite a stir. And I remember when I was growing up, we had a lake that my grandparents grew up around. It's called Realfoot Lake. And Realfoot Lake was created back in 1811, I believe it was. And there was an earthquake, and there was a meridian fault that's over in Missouri. And it's the only time that the Mississippi River has ever run backwards. You can look that up and do your research, but the earthquake and the land sunk and created this low area, and then when the water came back, it filled up that area and then created Realfoot Lake. And it's called Realfoot because of the Indians that lived around there, were the Realfoot Indians. And the reason I tell you about that lake, in contrast to or similarities to the Sea of Galilee, where that wind would come down and stir up the water. Realfoot Lake, anybody that's lived down there for any length of time knows that you can't go out on that lake without a guide, unless you really know that lake, because it's still, underneath down there. It can create some shifting of the earth and so forth, and a small earthquake can send that water, it gets pretty good size, and you can get out there and sink and lose your bearings. And the other thing about it is on that lake, all those tree stumps are still out there, so you can get in trouble real fast. So when you hear stories about the Sea of Galilee and the wind stirring up, even to this day, that people go out there and they will see that you can get in some trouble real quick, and just that little 13-mile area, you can get in trouble real fast. We got lakes around here. I think Lake Pontchartrain is 20 some odd miles or even more than that. You can tell just how small this particular lake is, or they call it a sea, but it's pretty small in comparison. But the amount of fish that they get out of there is it's something else. And the reason I say that is to give you some background as to where John grew up, what kind of business he was in, and give you a little bit of a flavor of who he was. And he was in the business of being a fisherman and so forth, and Jesus calls upon him to be a disciple. So after they pull the fish into the boat, and they've got more than the boats are sinking or whatever, it goes on, and we're reading, actually I was reading out of Luke chapter 5. It says that when when they had done this, they enclosed a great quantity of fish, and the nets began to break. So they signaled to the other, and like I was reading before, they signaled to the other, Simon's partners, which was James and John, to come help. And when Simon Peter, as he's known, saw that, he fell down to his knees at Jesus' feet, and he said, "Go away from me, I'm a sinful man," meaning that he knew that there was a divine nature about Jesus, and he was the promised one, the Messiah. So anyway, this is a little bit of a story of how John came to know Jesus. And the reason I told you all this is to kind of transition into some other things that kind of give you an idea of how you can rely on the Scripture itself. And I want to introduce you to a fellow, and his name is Polycarp. All right, let me get over here and let's see if we can pull this up real quick. Here's a picture of Polycarp, and I'll use these pictures. Nobody had a camera back then, so what they're going on is, the long-bearded fellow, the older guy, depicted of somebody of deity and so forth. So you'll see a lot of pictures if you do as research and so forth, and you pull these people up, you'll find a lot of different pictures that look like this of different individuals. And I've got a couple of more I'm going to show you, and you'll see the similarities between the two. But anyway, Polycarp, he lived from 69 to 156 A.D. And John now, he lived to 100 A.D. Okay? So John was alive during the time of Jesus. He was an apostle. He's one of the 12 apostles. He spent the 3.5 years with Jesus during that whole time. There was a time frame in there when all of the other apostles had been martyred. Even Paul was gone at that point. And John was the last one. And I guess there's some debate on what particular time, but he wrote the book of John. He wrote the 3 epistles of John, John 1, John 2, and John 3, and he also wrote Revelation. And the John 1, 2, and 3 was written, I believe, when he was teaching in Ephesus. But there was a ruler out of Rome that were persecuting Christians. And this was after 70 A.D., where part of Rome burned, and the Nero had blamed the Christians for that. And there's some studies out there that maybe Nero said it himself, and just wanted to blame the Christians for something, and this was his way of making that happen. So anyhow, Polycarp was alive in 69. John was alive, and Polycarp became a disciple of the Apostle John, and was a student tutored under him. So he knew John intimately, and which shows you that you have Jesus, you have the Apostle John, but you also have somebody that John taught, and Polycarp, that lived on past the first century. He lived he was like 86 years old, lived till 156 A.D. Now he was martyred, and there's a story about how that came about, and that's another point about dying for something you strongly believe in. Polycarp had a dream it was I don't know, a few days or a week before or whatever, that he was going to be burned at the stake, and he already knew that the authorities were looking for him to arrest him, and because they were arresting Christians just because they were Christian. And Polycarp had been a Christian all of his life. But he had a dream that he was going to be burned at the stake, and what the proconsul, the leader, Roman leader in that area, was wanting him to do was denounce his faith, and said, all you have to do is say, Caesar is Lord, and you can go on about your way. And Polycarp says, no, the Lord has served me, dealt with me fairly over my entire life. I believe who he is. He is the Son of God, and I'm not going to turn my back on him now and denounce my faith. So, they couldn't get him to sway away from that, and I think they were gonna nail him to the stake, and he said, no, just tie me up. I think they were gonna tie me. He said, no, I'll stay here. And he had prayed beforehand, and when they came to arrest him, the arresting officers at that time actually were ashamed. And where have we heard that in today's age about some of the things that our local police were asked to do in these recent times and so forth. So he went before pro-council and was told to denounce his faith and proclaim that Caesar was Lord, and he refused to do that. And so he prayed for an hour, or had asked to pray for that particular time and talk to the Lord and so forth. And the interesting thing about this story is that, he says, I have no problem. I already know what's going to happen. And they put him up there and built this, the wood around him and set that on fire. And they noticed that, he wasn't burning. He was in the midst of the fire and he wasn't burning. And how he died is they ordered one of the soldiers to go up with a spear and stab him, and that's how he died. So he had faith, and the Lord took care of him, that he didn't even burn at, when they built this fire around him. Now, where have we heard that story before? Back in when Daniel was thrown into the fiery furnace. So anyway, Polycarp was a influential being. Now, the Bible wasn't canonized until about 382 AD, but the writings and the teachings of Bishop Polycarp had a lot of influence into the actual writings for John and their authenticity. And there's another guy that I want to tell you about, and there's a picture that I found of him. He's praying and he's sitting there and he doesn't burn and so forth. So there's another guy that comes along, and he is a student of Polycarp. And he lived from 130 to 202, so he was alive at 130. Polycarp didn't die until 156. And he was a student of Polycarp. Now, he didn't he wasn't, martyred and so forth, or he escaped the persecution, and he was basically on a trip to France when they were looking for him. So he escaped out of that, and that was about 177 A.D., and shortly thereafter he became the Bishop of Lyons. There's two pieces that he wrote. One was called Against Heresies, and the other one was Proof of Apologetic Preaching, and both those two are intact. They have the writings from that. What I'm showing you is a progression of people that was in the 1st and 2nd century that knew John, was taught under John. The next person was taught under Polycarp. So you have this progression here, and there was another one, Titus. I'll go back to this one. The student, his name was the Bishop of Irenaeus of Lyons. I didn't get his name in there correct. So we'll go forward. And another guy that was influential that knew Irenaeus was a guy by the name of Titus Flavius Clemens, and he was known of Clement of Alexandria. And he lived from about 150 to 215 A.D., was brought up in Athens. He was a Greek theologian. He was a pagan. He converted over to Christianity. And he's known as the founder of the Alexandrian School of Theology, and he taught the divine nature of Christ. So you have a progression of people that knew. And the reason I say that is getting back to the question, is the Bible trustworthy, and can we believe that what it says is actual scripture from 2,000 years ago? You know, I brought up the point of somebody wondering about, you know, this type of question, and I said, well, you know, nobody was alive when Christopher Columbus was around, but it's in a book somewhere, and you know, you can look at the writings, and you gain knowledge of that history just by going back and reading about this stuff. And it's the same way with you know, if you go all the way back to the Bible, you know, and it's one of those things. It's a trustworthy book. You know, we can go on and on and on and on about church history and so forth, and it's, you know, ups and downs and so forth. But the Word has stayed inerrant for all these thousands of years, you know, and can we trust who God is? You know, it's like I was thinking about today, you know, on average you take about 20,000 breaths every day, but you don't even think about it. And that is determining your next breath. I mean, God's in control of all that. So I wanted to go through that and give you a little bit of insight as to the reliability and the truthfulness of the Word, and give you a flavor of who these people were, especially John, and how there is a progression over those first and second centuries where you have documentation, not just the Bible, but somebody that knew the actual author of Scripture and knew Jesus himself. So you have testimony, you have writings and so forth that support that stuff, the writings in the Bible. So, well, I want to thank you for being with us today. I hope that you will visit with us again on the next segment, and I will probably most likely get into some scripture in the book of John and kind of go through the first part, or if the Lord puts it upon me to do something else, I'll do something else. But anyway, I want to thank you for being with us today, and if you like this, hit that little like button on YouTube and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, and God bless.